Welcome to the program. My name is Martin Shenkman, and I'm joined by a colleague, Amanda Koplin. Um, and I'll ask Amanda after my brief introduction to just tell you her background. And we're honored to have a very special guest with us, Betsy Jamison, who's going to tell you her story. Amanda and I have done a host of programs, webinars, articles, presentations on addiction, mental health issues, and so many of the things that sadly just don't get enough airtime and especially enough attention, we believe, in the professions, law and the allied estate planning and related professions. And this is really a continuation of that effort to try to make an impact on professions to help those that need help and help us do better at what we do, which is trying to help people. Amanda, why don't you just briefly tell, you know, your role and what you do professionally so they understand, and then introduce Betsy.
So I'm Amanda Koplin. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a consultant to many, many different lawyers, estate planners, trusted advisors, trustees, that kind of stuff. And so Marty and I got very, very involved a while ago on talking about the mental health of different professionals. And so recently I've gotten invited to speak on this topic at a different trust conference coming up. And so as we had explored these topics in the past, we come across people, and I always say faces, families, and futures are forever altered. And that is every single story behind the stat that we neglect to see when we just look at numbers. We disassociate ourselves from the people involved. And so I called Marty last time and I said, there's a story I want to tell and pictures I want to show. And in true lawyer fashion, he said, "Oh no, we don't have consent for that, and we can't do it without consent." And I was like, "Oh, lawyers." And so this time, I said, "I'm gonna show this story." And there was a man who drew me in, and his name was Ken Jamison. And I looked at this picture, and I saw Betsy was in the picture with him, and I just looked at this picture for hours, and I said, "Okay, if this is the right way to do it, I'm going to reach out." And so as I deep dove into Ken's life and everything I could read about him on the internet, it occurred to me again and again that there was one story left untold, and that was Betsy's story. And I knew that despite everybody being taken off guard, that there would be people that weren't taken off guard by his suicide because they had lived by his side in the most vulnerable moments of his life. And so I had gotten a hold of Betsy through Tabitha, one of the partners at Ken's law firm at the time where he died. And Betsy and I had struck up a conversation, and she was generous enough to share her story with me. And I called up Marty and I said, I met her. And I said, she's willing to do this webinar with us to talk about the impact of living with somebody who's struggling with mental health and involved in the culture of law firms and the impact of that. But I think the bigger thing for me that I really want to put forward today is that everybody who has this kind of type A personality, who's a fixer, they feel like they are a burden, and the only way to fix it is to take themselves out of the equation. And my hope in Betsy sharing her story is that another lawyer, another financial advisor, another person out there who feels the same way that Ken felt will hear her words and see their own family. And they'll be brave enough to ask questions that Ken couldn't ask. And we're not just here right now to tell a story. We're here to save lives and to change families. So, Betsy, I'm wondering if you could just introduce a little bit about yourself and the background of your story.
Wow, that was a great introduction. Ken and I met at Ohio State. And we were in college together, got married right after I graduated, moved to Cincinnati so that he could go to UC's law school, University of Cincinnati's law school. We were married 35 years. We raised 3 kids. We had a perfect life. We lived in the right house, and we sent our kids to the right school. And it was great. He practiced law with one partner for 28 years, and he decided to leave that partner and go to a larger firm where he'd have more collegial work. And that's exactly what happened. His law practice ballooned, and although that was great, it was a lot more work. He was at his desk at 7 in the morning and didn't come home till after 7 at night. And that was maybe 4 years before his death. And in that 4 years, his personality changed. I'm not saying it's all because of the work, but he got anxious that he couldn't keep up that level of work. So that anxiety and comparing all those years, comparing himself against those other attorneys, can I keep up this pace? Just started wearing on him. The first thing that I noticed was not sleeping. He'd try to go to bed together, and then he'd leave the bedroom and go upstairs and pace. And I could hear him pacing. He wanted the bedroom dark as it could be, but yet he left the room. That didn't help. Started seeing a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I went to many of those appointments with him. The first drug that they gave him was Xanax, and he ate it like candy. He had it in his pockets, and throughout the day he would take it. It wasn't just a couple times a day. And that was, I think, the beginning of the medication experiment. It was trial and error. Well, let's try this antidepressant. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's try another one. We'll add this one to it. And he had, at the end, a cocktail of drugs. And I can't say that any of them helped. Did they contribute to his suicide? Many think maybe it did. But back to your point that Ken thought he was going to be a burden and that he could not keep up this pace, and he didn't know what he'd do if he wasn't an attorney, that his whole identity was being that man, that fixer. He wanted to get justice for people. Everybody had a problem, and every phone call is a problem and a stressor. But he wanted to take care of these people. When it became evident that he couldn't really work, he did not want anyone at the law firm or any of our friends to know, because he thought his decisions back in the fall would be challenged because he was ill. So he himself was hiding. He was a great actor. He took a shower every day, even though he was really depressed. He got dressed. He went to work as long as he could. He was hospitalized just a week at the Lindner Center. It's a mental health facility here in Cincinnati, very well renowned. but they released him, and 10 days later, he took his life. And our family went through all the emotions. The first one, we were all guilty. Oh my gosh, why couldn't we have prevented this? He wrote long, very elaborate letters to me, to the 3 kids, to his mother, who was 96, to his sisters, to my family, to my brothers. Just loving letters like, you've been the best. You've taken care of me. You told me to get remarried. It was creepy. It's kind of a icky word, but it was creepy. It was like, it was so calculated.
Mm.
And in reflection, many people thought he probably decided in January to do this. And it took that long to figure it out. And he hung himself on a Sunday morning when he knew I'd be gone for 3 or 4 hours. And I came home from church to find him hanging in our basement.
That's a lot. You said so many important things, and I appreciate you sharing your story and your perspective. And one of the things Marty and I discovered the first time that we did this presentation on Advise a Mental Health Lawyer, mental health specifically, was that lawyers actually are going into law school as the fittest, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, of any profession that's at the beginning of their trajectory. And by the end of year 1, they're the worst off. And so there's a switch that starts to happen because they go in because they want to pursue justice. They see TV lawyers and they think, yes, I'm going to change the world. These are very well-meaning people. And suddenly there's a value change that has to happen in order to be successful in this toxic culture that's evolved. And there's this I think the word that was used in some of the articles, corrosive incivility. And you were rewarded for tearing people apart, and you are rewarded for seeing the ways that people can tear you apart. And you slowly but surely you armor up in order to be successful. And in the armoring, you end up separating yourself from the love that you can get, from the healing that you can get, from the connection that helps become a protective factor from things like suicide, depression, anxiety, and other kinds of mental health disorders. And it sounds like that was the case for Ken, that he wanted to change the world and he wanted to help people. And I remember looking at the picture I saw and looking into his eyes and just thinking, this is a kind man. This is not your kind of like stereotypical slicked back hair kind of lawyer that wants to make a bunch of money. This is your husband. This is your dad. This is your grandpa. This is your neighbor. This is your mentor. This is the guy that you just want to love. And I just kept getting drawn back to his picture. And I think to myself, a kind man in a toxic culture could never survive. And I imagine the battles he went through as the values that were pushed upon him were so intrinsically different from what he knew inside and the reasons he got into this. And what a struggle that must have been for him throughout the entirety of his career. And then the other thing that I've heard from many lawyers and financial professionals is they are gone so much. They don't get to be the parents or the spouses they want to be. And they feel like all they are to their family is a paycheck. And if they're not the paycheck, they feel like they have no value. And I'm wondering if you could speak to some of that in regard to Ken, if he had any feelings about being a provider and being just a paycheck in the family.
Absolutely. Especially as his income climbed, then he thought, oh, I have to have a year like last year. So I have to work this much harder or to keep that level of business going. So I have to get more clients. His psychologist, one big theme was always at every session, Ken, you got to slow down. Ken, you can't take another client. Let's work on ways to say no or ways to farm out some work. He had this group of 10 or 15 lawyers. Why couldn't some of them share some of that work? And that the psychologist challenged Ken on that. And Ken was a perfectionist and wanted to control. So I don't know that he could let go of very much work.
Betsy, what specialty did Ken have?
Commercial real estate and estate planning. He sat with couples, with financial people, and they work on their estate together, and he did their wills and trusts. So our son is an attorney. So your words, Amanda, are very powerful because Mike is full of life and he's a 5-year attorney. He's been in, and I can see his personality changing and the work. He works like a dog already, and I wonder about any balance he's already lost. So
If you ever want me and Marty to talk to him, we're happy to have a conversation.
well, I am going to ask my 3 kids to watch this and realize how powerful this story is.
I think this is going to be one of the most impactful presentations that has ever been done on this subject, because we're not just telling numbers, we're telling stories. In your tears, we all want to know that our lives are worth grieving over, that our lives are so impactful that somebody will cry and wail when we're gone. And I think that there is somebody watching this who's suffering so much inside, asking, is my life so impactful that somebody will wail when I'm gone? And I see even all these years later that Ken's life is so impactful that it still brings tears to your eyes. Your love for your kids is so profound that it brings tears to your eyes.
He was a great guy. He many people called Ken their best friend, and I found that interesting. And I didn't believe it, because if you were his best friend, wouldn't you have helped us at the end? But there was nobody there. They were running away. They didn't want Ken to be identified as this mental health poster boy. So a couple of those attorneys even said those words. I don't want Ken to be mental health, a poster child for mental health. And they shut down Tabitha in that because she wanted to keep telling Ken's story.
Yeah, I think that that is something that's really important to talk about. That, the more we have to perform, the more isolated we become from other people. And it is in their reactions that we gauge psychological safety. And so I understand the sentiment that Ken was more than his mental illness. I think that is something that they are trying to hang on to for them and for Ken's legacy. And I understand that. And I think that the way to go about it is to say people are more than their struggles. And Ken's story deserves to be told in its entirety, including his struggles, including his strengths, including his wishes and his impact. And when we can learn to tell our stories and accept each other's stories in their entirety, then we can get people the help that they need. But when problematic drinking, when depression, when anxiety is just the status quo, it's hard to say that anybody is actually problematic and needs help. Because if everybody else is tolerating the same level, why can't I?
Right.
And then we feel even more othered from the people we call our best friends and who call us their best friends. And these people are lawyers, financial advisors, they're not trained counselors. And so, what I've come to learn as a counselor is that all we know is what we've been taught. And if somebody doesn't step up to teach us something different, we can't live something different. But if one person can be brave enough to live something different, it provides a platform for other people to stand on to say, I hear you, and that's different than anything I've been taught, and I'll stand on this platform with you too.
He was more than his suicide and his struggles. He was funny and athletic, and he was an Ohio State cheerleader. He was just so fun and full of life. And as I reflect, his personality changed very drastically the last 5 years, but it must have slowly been changing right before my eyes to cope with the stress and workload that he had, and that he wanted to have us to have a great life. And it's not all about money, but it was a lot about money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into when you and Ken were younger and you just started dating and it progressed and then you got engaged. When he would talk about his hopes for life and a future and his career, I mean, what are the things he talked about and dreamed about?
The American dream. We wanted a home, and we got one. And we wanted kids, and we wanted some nice vacations. We both worked hard, but we also enjoyed a lot of those years. A lot of those vacations were great. We really didn't talk about what we wanted. We just we just worked for it, and life happened to us. our backgrounds were very similar. He was raised in Lima, Ohio, and I was raised in Akron, Ohio, and we went to church and had siblings, and Midwestern were very similar. Then we became Buckeyes, and Ohio State football was at the center of our lives, and we went to lots of games and enjoyed that. He had two life interests, law and the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I was so grateful for football season because he'd do something other than work. So we'd go to games, and so.
One of the things that really strikes me with type A personalities is that there's this striving and there's this go for more, go for bigger, like outdo yourself the last one, but there's no gauge for enough. There's just a lever for more. And I think that being able to reflect for yourself on what's enough is really important, because there's a limit to more that will take anybody out.
Doesn't the culture and so many of the
More is just more.
professions push that? And one of the things listening, and I don't mean to misstate anything, but Ken had a lot of things going for him. He had family, he had faith, he had success. He had Betsy, but he even sought help. And
He did
what's
a
terrifying to
lot of help.
me, with all of these positive influences around him, and the fact that he even sought help and medication, how others must be struggling that don't have a Betsy in their lives, that don't have faith, that don't have the successes that Ken had. There's got to be so many people in such incredible pain and struggle out there. It's concerning.
He studied this. He journaled. He exercised. He was really trying to manage it because he wanted to control it, but it got out of control.
I remember being in grad school, and my professor was talking about sitting with somebody who's suicidal. And I remember he said, when you talk somebody out of their feelings, then you disconnect yourself from their suffering and from them, and they just are deeper down inside of themselves. And he said, that's the mistake so many people make. And he said, the solution to sitting with someone who's suicidal is connecting with their suffering and reminding them there's an end point. Because the problem with suicide is they don't see an end point to their suffering.
Right.
And I could imagine that's where Ken was. And I think a lot about the situation these lawyers and financial professionals are in regard to, it's almost like trying to treat PTSD for a military person still in a war zone. Where is it going to end? And I can imagine that place that he was sitting in of, if I continue being a lawyer, it's going to kill me. If I don't, it's going to kill me. And how do you begin to resolve that conflict?
He became hopeless, and I saw his eyes glazed over. I couldn't talk to him even when I tried to connect. He had glassy eyes. I don't know where he went. He wasn't there.
Marty, Marty is my wingman in changing the world. I'm his wingwoman in changing the world, and we have a lot of discussions, and he has made very, very dedicated choices to spend time with his wife and his grandkids. I mean, for as much as we do in the world, he'll send me an email. Oh, I didn't get to this. I was spending time with my grandkids. And I think that's one of the bravest decisions that somebody could make, is to say, I know that there are consequences that might result from me prioritizing this in my time, and I'm willing to accept those consequences because his identity is so diversified that he is not just a lawyer. He is a grandfather. He is a father. He's a husband. He's a RV guy. He's an avid reader. I mean, that guy is like, he never stops reading and learning and teaching himself. But I always say identity is a lot like the stock market. When it's invested in one thing and it tanks, that's a deadly combination. And the important thing,
That's so common in the professions. It's so common. And it's fostered because then you can bill more hours and be more specialized and do a level of work. I wonder how, when people become so narrow, not only the impact on their lives that you're both talking about, but how can you be creative if you don't see a broader and bigger picture? But it's fostered.
And it was fostered early. This partner that he worked with for 28 years demanded Ken work on Saturdays. Well, we had 3 kids and they all had sports. And I finally said, I can't do Saturdays. I need you. Well, okay, I'll come home at noon. He about 2 would come home, and that was early. They were in grade school and in these sports. And so that was a struggle for us. And I usually was mad about it. And when he was home, his briefcase was on the kitchen table, and he was working at the end of the kitchen table. So,
will you tell me a little bit more about Ken as a father?
when he was with them, he was very present. I'd go to choir practice and I'd come home from choir practice. No one had taken a bath. Mike might not have eaten yet, but they had a lot of fun. They were in some project. And well, we were busy. And I'm like, everybody was supposed to take a bath. He was very engaged. If he was doing a project around the house, he wanted them with him. That house had a lot of trees and we had a lot of leaves, and we, of course, wouldn't hire that done. So we had to do the leaves, and the kids will remember those weekends with the leaves, with their dad and the wheelbarrow. Vacations, he was very present on vacations. They often were cities because I think Ken and I liked cities, and we had Chicago, we had a great New York City vacation. Discovering lots of things in those cities was fun for us, rather than a beach vacation. That wasn't our thing. Now that he's died, of course, Ken is a saint to my 3 children. He did no wrong. He was perfect. They didn't notice that he wasn't always there. I was the one that noticed that. In high school, he he tried really hard to get to every event, especially Mike, our youngest. Mike was a wrestler, and Ken was so proud of him. So I would say Mike would agree that Ken was at everything. We didn't have dinners together. That wasn't our style because Ken wasn't home. And the kids had to be fed before their evening event. So we didn't have happy little family dinners.
When Ken would talk about his kids and the kind of dad he wanted to be for them, you know, did he want to be a mentor they could look up to? Did he want to be like good time dad? Did he want to be the dad that was always there? Like, what kind of father did he envision himself being to them?
Because my 3 kids have 3 personalities, he was a different dad to each one. Elizabeth, the oldest, wanted comforted and wanted him to help on problems. Catherine she became a psychologist, and she wanted to talk everything out in depth, and I had to leave the room. So Catherine and Ken talked and analyzed things. I thought Catherine would become an attorney. She didn't. Mike, he was a good time dad with Mike. They went to Ohio State games together. They did athletic stuff together. And he supported Mike in, he was disappointed that Mike wasn't a better student, but he supported him the way he could. They related through Ohio State. And Mike went on to go to Ohio State and become an Ohio State cheerleader. Mike not only looks like Ken, he acts like Ken, and now he's an attorney. So I worry the most about Mike and his mental health.
I can understand that. It sounds like Ken had a gift of attunement where he could attune himself to what somebody else needed him to be. And he sounded like a very dynamic guy.
Every paper that Catherine wrote, even through college, she'd run by Ken, and they'd edit it together. They poured over her writing. Sometimes I get jealous about that relationship, but it's something I didn't have to give her, and he gave her that time.
There's a lot that's missing in your lives, I can imagine, based on what he poured into each person, what he could pour into each person.
The comments at the funeral were mostly not helpful. I have to admit, people don't know what to say. Don't say anything or say, I'm sorry. But we had a receiving line, I don't know why, and people came through, 800 people came to his funeral. Wow. People came through the line and said things like, oh, I'm sorry. He would have been a great grandpa. Now, why do you say that to my girls? You know, and they both remember these things. In our need to find relief, the girls made a book of stupid things people said at the funeral, and we have them listed because we had to make some sense out of this disaster. And so they put together this book, and I think it was helpful to just put it into perspective. People don't know what to say, and they said stupid things to us. They felt stupid. Yeah, he would have been a great grandpa. And now Catherine has a little 2-year-old, and she knows Ken never met Henry, and is never going to meet Henry, and never know him as grandpa. So it doesn't go away. It's this thing that's always there. You know, I don't think about it every single day, but the seasons change, I think about it. The holiday comes, I think about it. What he'd be like now at this age, and our relationship. We looked forward to having an empty nest and being free of kids, and that didn't ever happen.
Yeah. I want to just reaffirm that you're absolutely right. People don't know what to say. They just, like, oh wow, that must be hard. Like, yeah, or like, how are you doing? Well, not great, obviously.
Right. They said
Like,
to his mom's about the 5th person that said, "And how are you doing, Mary?" She just get away. She just would. I mean, you can say things at 96. You know, she didn't care. Get away. I don't want to hear that from anybody else. I'm not doing great. My son committed suicide.
yeah, people really don't know what to say. And I think the other thing is people are afraid to ask questions they don't know the answer to. And when I look at some of the data, I found some stuff about asking directly, do you have a problem drinking? Do you have depression? Do you have anxiety? And I think the numbers are relatively low compared to what we know the problems to be. And it struck me, why is this so low? And I think that immediately people jump to the stereotypes. I can get out of bed, so I must not be depressed. I could still shower. I must not be depressed. I could still work. I must not be depressed. I could still put a smile on my face. I must not be depressed. Everybody else around me is drinking this amount. I must not be a problem drinker. And going through the list. But what I learned is that when you ask very specific questions, people start to endorse problems at much higher rate when you give a standard definition of what that is. And so I think that being able to have the courage to ask things directly, and to be able to sit with somebody in their suffering versus trying to fix it, is one of the bravest acts that we could do in our society. And I think to be able to say to you after Ken has died, I can only imagine how hard this is for you. And I know I can't take the suffering away. Is there anything I can do to make it easier?
Right.
And I think that statement really affirms where you are and gives you the option for help. Can you clean my house? Can you, make meals? Can you, like any of those things that are just the practical tasks of life? That makes it easier. And people just they don't know. They don't know what to say, and they avoid, or they just say some cliche thing. And my hope is that people who are listening, they will see other people in life who are suffering like Ken and say, I know I can't take this away right now. I see that you're suffering. Is there anything I could do to make it easier? And understand that sometimes the answer is to keep asking, to
Right.
keep being with somebody, to connect with somebody in their suffering, versus allowing them to just scrape over it and say, oh, it'll be okay. I see that it's not okay and it's not getting better. I want you to know I'm here. And be able to point to what they're seeing instead of join into the masking and the performing.
Yeah.
I think that that's an incredibly brave act.
Betsy, do you think people around Ken were aware of his struggles? Not family, others.
No.
People that worked with him every day didn't notice the struggles?
Just at the end, because he went to work every day. And on a Friday night, maybe in March, he was driving home and called me and said, I can't keep it together. Something's happening. And he was having a breakdown, and he drove home, and I offered to come get him. And he said, no, I'll drive home. But that night we went to the Lindner Center. But until then, he perhaps maybe 2 or 3 of his inner circle knew that he was depressed and anxious. But people did rally, a big community did rally around us after the death. And that week offered things like you're saying, Amanda. And I mentioned, oh gosh, we're going to have a whole bunch of people come for the funeral. Somebody needs to run the vacuum. The vacuum was run by somebody. I don't know who, And so back to that point, keep asking and do things, do concrete things. A set of towels came because she knew I was going to have company, and I complained about we didn't have any towels that matched. So I got 10 towels that matched. But people came and visited that week. It was a Sunday, and then we had the funeral on Saturday, and they came to visit, and many people said, why didn't you tell us? Don't keep any more secrets, Betsy. And I was just so, why weren't you involved in Ken's life? And Ken did not want me to share. I talked with both my brothers a lot, but they were out of town. They just listened to me worrying about Ken.
Did the kids understand what was happening with Ken throughout the years, or was it really only towards the end that they began to understand how bad things were?
Only towards the end, because he was not himself, and we really didn't socialize. So we weren't going to somebody's house for dinner anymore, and people weren't coming to our house. We did continue to go to church, but it was a struggle, meaning he just wanted to go and come back, not talk to people, which was not his style at all.
Did anybody at church notice?
We were pretty close to our pastor, and he did. In fact, on that Sunday morning, he pulled me aside and said, "How about I come over this afternoon and I have a beer with Ken?" And I said, "That'd be great." Well, he came over, but Ken had killed himself. So if people knew, they just didn't know the seriousness of it.
Mm.
And it was still a shock that day that he killed himself. Even though I was living this, I didn't know it was going to be that day. I was going to work and coming home at lunch and making him some lunch and then going back to work. And when I'd be driving, I worked kind of close to the house. When I was driving home, I'd always wonder what I was going to find. So those 3 months that he sort of wasn't working and he was at our house, I wasn't sure what was going to be there when I got home.
I think people's patterns sometimes change so slowly and their personalities change so slowly that your brain doesn't have a chance to acclimate that this is a change and a significant change because the dial turns up a little bit at a time. And, I'm wondering, looking back, is there anything that you would say to somebody else who's out there right now? These are little shifts that I saw in Ken. And if you see them in yourself, or you see them in your partner, or you see them in your spouse, these are things that you could bring attention to.
Not wanting to socialize was a big change. But it came on a little slowly. Because he'd do some things. But not other things. Lack of energy he wasn't sleeping, so he didn't have any energy to function in the day, but he was going through the motions, but he was half there. The not sleeping was the very first big behavior change. And if you don't get sleep, you're not effective.
Wouldn't people, his colleagues, have noticed that in performance quality, hours, something?
If they did, I didn't know about it. They noticed the last 4 months, but not before that. 3 months, maybe. Well, and if they did, the ones that are concerned about their practice and their law firm, they didn't want Ken's decisions to be challenged. So are they going to bring it up and go through all of Ken's notes and Ken's work for that last year? I don't think they wanted to do that.
The question that just came into my head is, at what point do we draw a line that we're no longer willing to trade lives for liabilities? I don't know where that line is, but I think that each law firm, each institution, and ultimately each person has to ask themselves that question. And I know that there will be consequences, and I know that there will be repercussions. And I think being able to say that I saved this person's life because I was willing to step in and say something earlier, and I was no longer willing to play the game and trade liabilities for lives. You can get a job at other law firms. You can get a job starting your own practice, but you cannot replace a person. And I think asking yourself that question about, once you notice, what are you willing to live with? Because everybody who noticed and traded his life for the liabilities, that is something that they have to live with too, every single day. And I don't think anybody thinks this person is going to kill themselves. I think that is too much for somebody's mind to wrap around. And I think the question really becomes, if this person kills themselves, what am I able to live with? That's the question.
Even that question, there's questions much less than that. So if we are creating, condoning, maybe even fostering an environment that is physically and emotionally damaging to people, even if it doesn't result in a situation like Ken, but just physically sickens people from the lack of balance in their lives, the stress, pressure, where do you draw the line there? Do you draw a line?
Our society values success, and the definition of success needs to change or be analyzed.
Yes.
Success is having a wonderful family and having enough. More is just more. It doesn't mean you've added value to your life.
I think that's a really profound statement, because there is a point that your quality of life is unshifted by the more money you make. And whether you have 5 million or 10 million in your investment accounts, your quality of life day to day won't change.
It's not, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's not just money. It's also the perceived prestige of what you've done, the clients you've done it for, the dollars you've generated. It's not only about the money in your bank. It's the perceived, I'm trying to think of the word, accolades or accomplishments on other measures as well. But those aren't really the substantive measures of success, as you point out, Betsy.
I work with a lot of different people who have different kinds of disorders, but for people who are struggling with things like eating disorders, I say to them, nobody will comment in your eulogy that you're in a child-sized casket at the age of 35, or that you fit into a size 00 jeans. Nobody will make those comments. And they will talk about the kind of person you are, the kind of person you were. They will talk about the impact in their hearts, not in their bank accounts. They will talk about the dreams that you had. But with Ken, I don't think anybody at his funeral bragged about the billable hours that he had every single month. And nobody started name dropping the clients he was working with. And I think that sometimes it's not until it's too late that we reflect on the things that actually matter in life.
Those are much harder to measure.
I spoke at Ken's funeral, and I talked about our 3 kids, and that's what mattered. And I told them the gift that they received from their dad. And each one, I thought, received something different. My gut, tenacity with a twinkle. And Catherine, Ken gave his best every day. Catherine gives her best every day. And Elizabeth, Ken knew how to develop relationships, and that's what he gave Elizabeth. She knows how to keep relationships going through her life. So I found it an out-of-body experience. I had to speak, and I had to say that Ken was more than this suicide. And he's given us these 3 remarkable young people. And that was my gift to them that day. His first line in his suicide note was, "I know you don't believe this, but you're going to be better off without me." That's the basic thing I said. We're not going to be better off without you. We need you. I said it over and over. You're more than this job. We'll figure out something else to do. He could have not worked for the rest of his life, probably. We'd figure it out. It's such a shame. And he destroyed some stuff by doing this. He destroyed, I mean, we've built lives beyond Ken's death, but he destroyed that chapter. That life is dead. I didn't let it define me. I wanted to move on. I have hope, and that I had lots of living yet to do, and I wanted that message to be said at that funeral too. So if somebody's struggling or has a spouse, get help, but it feels like mental health professionals are in the 1850s. Some of the drugs were just experimenting on Ken. Let's try this. Let's try this. My advice is to keep hanging in there and find the next thing that might help. And do all the things. Do the psychiatrist, do the psychologist. Get mental health drugs.
I don't disagree with you. I think that just like you could find lawyers who were in the 1950s, you could find mental health professionals who are in the 1950s.
Yeah.
But there are really good ones out there too. And I think it's about due diligence, it's about research, it's about finding the right one. And I think part of the advice I would give you as a spouse, as a friend, as a partner at a law firm or anywhere, when somebody is struggling with depression, it's really hard for them to do the research themselves. One more thing can feel like the last straw. And so, one of the ways you could be tactically helpful is by doing it for them and giving them 3 options so that it narrows it down, but it also provides choices.
Right.
And I just always want to throw myself out as a resource to point people in the right direction. You don't have to call me. You can write me an email. It could be through a screen. It could be through a text message, whatever feels safe in order to reach out and get a resource. I am happy to connect anybody with any resource that they need because I do recognize that 1, it's a brave act to ask for help, and 2, it might be the only time somebody has that kind of courage.
That's
We
one
need
thing
to,
Ken did was do the research. What should I be doing? Who should I be seeing? What does this drug do? Anyway, go ahead.
those are places firms can help people too if they become aware of these issues. And it would be a very positive step.
Right.
I think we should try to wrap up. Betsy, are there any other comments you want to share before we close? I'm just overwhelmed with your comments and how profound and how strong of a person that you are. So thank you for sharing what you have. And you've made a lot of very profound comments that I hope have a meaningful impact on a lot of people.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Comments or thoughts to close?
I do think, Marty, this is probably one of the most powerful webinars that we've ever done because Betsy was willing to share her story and her tears and her life with us. And I just want to reiterate, yeah, I just want to reiterate, and Marty will make sure to post this, my contact information. You can reach out to me at amanda@koplinconsulting.com, and it could be any kind of modality you want. You can easily find me online, and I do recognize that this could be the one time somebody could ask for help, and I want to be that person to point you in the right direction if I can. So please have the courage to reach out, whether you're the spouse or whether you are the person suffering, because everybody is suffering and your life is not better without that person you love in it. And that if you are the one struggling, there are dreams that flow through you and dreams that are built with you. And this is a time that will end, and there's help that could help that end, that suffering end.
Thank you everyone for joining us again. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Amanda, for all your compassion and concerns. And we hope this has a positive impact. Thank you, everyone.